Hey there, it's John, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Professor Henrique Schneider. He is a member at the Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises and also a professor of economics at Nordakademie. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Schneider. Hello.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me here.
It's a great pleasure. Could I ask you quickly just to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about your work in the academic and also the public sphere, please?
Yes, thank you. I have two hats on, or at least economist of the Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises. This is a private body that is something like a mix between a think tank and a pressure group. It's a think tank because we devise economic policies that are pro small and medium enterprises. And it's also a pressure group because these policies that we have devised, we try to implement them in the Swiss political arena. In addition to that, I'm also a professor of economics at the Nordakademie. Nordakademie is a German University of Applied Sciences. There, I teach economics, and I do a lot of research on digital business models, fintech, alternative investing, and also artificial intelligence.
Great. Thank you, Professor Schneider, for that introduction. We're going to talk a lot about the things you ended there with, the future, and I think also with COVID and the impact on SMEs, a lot of current events. But before we do that, I wanted to dive a little bit into your knowledge and provide some context for others who are perhaps not so familiar with Switzerland and its economic development. Could you say a few words about how Switzerland became a unique place in the world and tell us a little bit about, I think, what's commonly called the Swiss miracle?
Well, I don't know if we would like to call it the Swiss miracle. I prefer the term success story. It's already very good. A miracle, it's too good to be true. I think the secret sauce of Switzerland is not even that secret. The sauce of Switzerland, the magic sauce of Switzerland, is that we have a free economy where actions, consequences are more or less aligned. What do I mean? I mean that if people become entrepreneurs, they will be able to ripe the fruit of their work. But if they fail, they will fail. There will be no one to help them with failure. The one point being, if they fail, they can restart. It's not a problem. We try to be a very principle-based economy. We try not to have too much regulation. We try not to have anyone telling other people what to do. And I think that there's, I would say, permissionless economic activity that is the one dominating factor explaining the Swiss success.
The next question I was going to ask is, where do small and medium enterprises fit into things? Because I think most people are familiar with, big banks, big pharma companies, things of that nature. But of course, Switzerland has a long history of small and medium enterprises as well, and they've become very successful and a part of its overall image now. Can you say more about that?
So, let me give you some numbers. 99% of all Swiss enterprises are small or medium. What do I mean? I mean, these are enterprises that have less than 250 people on staff. In Switzerland, there is only one measure for what are big and large companies. We do not differentiate by market capitalization. We do not differentiate by a balance sum. We only do the staff count, the head count. So anyone that employs less than 250 full-time equivalent is a small or medium company. And they make up of more than 99% of all 600,000 companies in the country. But this number is more or less the same in every country. If you look at Germany, if you look at the US, if you look at South Korea, they all have more or less 99% of all companies as SMEs. The big difference in Switzerland is that these SMEs together, they create 60 to 62% of the value add. This is different than in other countries, because in other countries, SMEs are usually responsible for something between 40 and 50% of the value add. It is in Switzerland where their value add is at least above average in an international comparison. Also, in order to continue with the figures, in Switzerland, of the exterior commerce is done by SMEs.
Sorry, what do you mean exactly by exterior commerce? Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, exporting and importing. So 60% of Swiss imports is conducted by SMEs, and 45% of Swiss exports is conducted by SMEs. So if you count them together, import and export, so the whole foreign trade, we are in 50% conducted by SMEs. This is also above average in an international comparison. Internationally, if you take Germany or South Korea, which are foreign trade prone economies, you only have the SMEs there are responsible for something like a third of foreign trade. In Switzerland, is half.
Very interesting. And so I guess there's been a long history then, and there's a real important role between medium-sized firms and larger firms. For one, because of export, and I guess to a certain extent because of innovation and the development of new technologies. Is that true to say?
That is true to say. Of course, the whole economic realm is a symbiotic thing. It's not, we don't want to differentiate too much between large and small, and or large and medium and small. They are tied together in value chains. But not only that, also the workforce is tied together. We know in Switzerland, 1/3 of all innovation comes directly from the workforce. And I'm not talking about some research and development units or divisions. I'm talking about people working and developing new stuff, innovating while working in their normal everyday routines. You might ask, why? How is it possible that people do that? The thing is, in Switzerland, this vocational education background that we have, that people learn while working. On-the-job learning makes them able to think proactively on how to improve stuff technically, so product-wise, and process-wise, managerially. And these two together, plus the culture of permissionless economic activity, leads to an enormous innovative power coming from not only the enterprises, but from their staff, directly from their staff.
And I guess, is that also related to things like patents? I mean, we've heard about companies like Google that allow their employees to generate new innovations, and you mentioned a little bit R&D, but what you're saying is something a bit different. This is individuals who are highly educated, actively involved in different sizes of industry, and they're actually generating 30% of the innovation Switzerland is so famous for, right?
Correct. Let me go once back to that highly educated. They are highly educated, but not academically trained. They come out of the practice. Vocational education is you learn by doing. Not only in doing stuff, you learn by doing, reflecting on what you're doing, critically assessing what you're doing in order to become better, more productive for the future. And we found out that process of learning also leads to more innovation that is done directly by the staff.
To some degree, I've seen a bit of a contradiction. I know Switzerland is very well known for, for example, research in the hard sciences, as well as for patenting innovative industrial solutions in both incremental and more, larger innovative steps. But I'm not as familiar with there being great success in what we're more, talking about these days in terms of a startup ecosystem and commercializing innovation. Can you speak a little bit to whether or not that's something that does work and it's not well understood, or is there an opportunity for Switzerland to, for example, develop more of a venture capital community, as some people are currently trying to do? What are your thoughts around those points?
I think this is a series of questions that are interrelated. So the one question is, what is your set of indicators? Is the IPO your set of indicators? If you take the IPO as the main indicator, then that's true. Then Switzerland is a laggard. If you take the number of patents as an indicator, then Switzerland is okay. However, if you take the amount of private money in private, if you take the amount of private money in private investments in more or less innovative sectors, then Switzerland is as performant as, for example, the US, Israel, or Singapore. There is a lot of private money directed at private investment in different types of innovative areas. But first of all, it's not marketed as such. And second, it's not marketed as startup, because at least that's my impression. Culturally, Switzerland has a problem with the word startup. Also, I have that problem too. I think that out of the many labels anyone can call herself in business, startup is it's simply it's a dumb label, because you are not starting up anything. You are being entrepreneurial. It means you are taking things into your own matter. You are risking. You are taking active risk, and maybe that risk is rewarded or not. So what you are doing, you're not starting up. You are embarking in an entrepreneurial process of discovery. And that thing, there is a lot going on. If you look at the private markets in Switzerland, it's thriving private markets. And when I mean that, I mean that not only in comparison to the European one, because that is dead, but I mean volume-wise comparable to the US or other larger private markets.
Um, I think we were really talking about success or failure and who takes risk as an entrepreneur earlier. And I was curious, Switzerland has a very strong democratic and capitalistic history. And there have been, I think, in the last couple of years, referendums around topics like universal basic income or some more socialistic types of ideas. And when I look at, for example, the way that in the financial services industry, we see large incumbent structures of legacy corporations downsizing and being threatened, there's sort of a question of how do we shift talent, and I've even actually written a short piece with the Swiss Finance Institute about the golden cage and when do people decide to leave a banking job and pursue an entrepreneurial career, as you put it. Do you see there being a bit more of a need to have a broader mind about success and failure as corporations downsize and more activity shifts into, let's say, a risk-taking type of an atmosphere? Because when we force everything into being very stable and reliable, we don't get these type of amazing results which generate return on investments and changes in society. And yeah, if we're not risk-taking or accepting of risk in a certain controlled space, how does a country evolve, and how does it remain at the leading edge? Do you have some thoughts around that?
Yes, actually, I agree with what you said. It's about, if you want to put me into economic terms, the economist Joseph Schumpeter, the one who came up with the creative destruction, he framed creative destruction as the perennial gale of creative destruction. And it's really that. It's legacy companies are legacy companies. They tend to be laggards in terms of dynamics. And in order to become more dynamic, they are trying now to downsize. I am not a managerial person. I think that it seems to me to be the correct way to do so, which means they set a lot of people free. What do we do with those free people? Of course, some people are afraid that there is no future for them. I don't think so. There is entrepreneurial activity everywhere, and those people that are being set free, they have the skills to engage in, as you say, under controlled conditions, to engage in a risk-seeking behavior, in finding out what a market needs, and making products for them. If I may make a very personal example, I am invested with a company right now. I call it, it's the app company for old people, because the entrepreneurs there are older than the usual startup hype person. They are around 40 and 50, and the product they make is for many people from the first glance of a boring product, which is about pension savings. But the pension savings market in Switzerland is very big, and at the same time very static. There is not much innovation there. So we see that a lot of people being laid off by legacy companies, banks, and so on. They know about the state of the Swiss pension plan market, and they know that there is an innovative potential there because of their skills, but also because of their experience in the market. Now that they are free from the corporate cage, they try to find out or develop new products for those people interested in no, for the customers interested in doing something else or something new with their pension plans. And this is a company, I don't know if I am allowed to say the name, but this is a company where I invested a lot of money because, not because it's a unique company. There's a lot of people doing that, but I just believe in the team, which is a team of former employees and now entrepreneurs that want to set up or they want to put their experience in motion from what they had into this new market. So developing new technologies for the pension market in order to make it more accessible to the people that are insured and cheaper.
I think that sounds great, and I'm a big believer and have been for a long time that whether it's because of an industry is mature and declining, or because of, for example, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, artificial intelligence might replace us in the workforce and make us all much more idle. There's this real opportunity for us to figure out where are the new problems to solve, where can we create new value for things based on that tradition and that knowledge we come from. So I really agree with that quite extensively. I wanted to ask in more detail. You talked about in Switzerland how there's a very pragmatic approach to success and failure, and I tend to agree with that. Although I know there's also a bit of a Protestant ethic around, let's say, judging those who fail. I've certainly seen that around a reluctance to fail in the startup community and to talk about failure, which in other parts of the world is something that's really embraced. Is that something that I misunderstand? Is it something that you think is still valid? Because I was wondering, if you are somebody like you just described who leaves a bank and starts a new fintech venture, how do you get funding for that? What if things do all go wrong? I mean, is Switzerland really that friendly to risk takers who are trying to develop the economy and society?
I think that Switzerland is friendly to risk takers. And again, there are two things in what you asked. I want to take them separately. Let's begin with the first one. I don't know how long you're here, but we are Swiss. We basically don't want to talk about anything that is private or intimate. Swiss people are, I'm sorry, it's a stereotype, but Swiss people try to be very friendly and at the same time very shallow, because anything that goes into a very specific kind of business decision is something that we do not like to discuss in public. By the way, neither failure nor success. Success, of course, a little bit more, but failure, no. That applies not only to those people that call themselves startups, that applies even to, let's say, usual SMEs. As I said, I'm the chief economist of the Swiss Federation of SMEs. We have around 500,000 companies there. I don't know anything about those companies, and they don't want to tell me anything about themselves. Anything that I might use, they will simply say, no, we don't want to tell. It's even the successes they don't tell me. So, for example, just to make this point a little stronger, right now we're leading a campaign for the acceptance or for the adoption of the free trade agreement with Indonesia. And we know by the statistics that there are SMEs exporting to Indonesia already now in Switzerland. Okay, so we're trying to look and find them in our membership. But even those companies, we know that we even know the companies that export to Indonesia in our membership, even when maybe we found them out. The entrepreneurs will still say, no, I don't want to talk about that. Because this is considered too intimate or too private to be discussed on an open space. So people not telling everything that's happening in their business is normal. It's not only a speciality of failure or a speciality of so-called startups. Now, let me come to the more interesting and important part of your question.
Okay, thanks.
Which is the friendliness to new ventures. I think that Swiss investors, and I am in the board of some companies that invest. I'm in the boards of some companies that invest. Tend to scrutinize very thoroughly companies asking for money. And because of that, it seems more difficult. However, again, in my experience, as a person that has some experience in Switzerland and in the US, we invest less, but the return on investment is more secure than the American approach, which is to open up, and out of 50 investments, you get 3 right. That is not the way we do it in Switzerland. The way I saw it being done in Switzerland is to scrutinize better and then invest the means we have more focused on those companies where the probability of success is high.
Right. Changing gears a little bit, you were mentioning the definition of SME in Switzerland is related to the number of employees. And I was thinking a bit as we shift into talk about artificial intelligence a bit, which I know is a passion of yours and a research focus, as workforces generally are getting smaller and companies are getting more nimble. I know there are exceptions, but let's say in general that technology has allowed us to be more efficient and manage smaller teams. Do you see any change in the importance of SMEs relative to larger corporations in that context? And in particular, do you see there being implications from there for regulation and how we look at the scale of companies and how we regulate different types of things? We've seen that, for example, in fintech, where in some cases incumbents have clear advantages and almost a captive regulator, but then also on the flip side, they'll say that fintechs can operate differently than a traditional regulated bank, and therefore the regulation isn't quite fair enough. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of how regulation might need to change in the future. What are your thoughts in the context of SMEs and how they evolve with technology and regulation?
Yeah, that's at the heart of what we do in the Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises. We believe that there is too much regulation in Switzerland, and we believe that there is an absolute need to decrease the amount of regulation we have, but not only the amount, also the granularity of regulation we have. We do not believe in firm-specific, sector-specific, or size-specific regulation. We think that regulation should be based on principle and then apply to everyone equally. But you mentioned fintech. I've been involved in those kinds of things. I've been member of the Swiss strategic working group on the future of the financial place, Switzerland. It had a better name. I just don't remember the name of that group. But again, there is a lot of discussion going on, and usually incumbents say, "Well, we have to regulate the new ones like us because they have some other advantages." And my answer is no. We do not. We cannot. We should not regulate the incumbent, the entrance. If there is anything to do, is we have to lower the regulatory burden of the incumbents. If you think that there is different if you think that there is a different incursion of regulation on you, then try to diminish it and not to create more regulation for the other one. So I think that one thing that we really need to do in Switzerland is to lower the regulatory burden of every business. I'm not talking only about fintech. You have the same discussion in every sector, even in the, sorry to say, less technology prone sector there is, which is the agrarian sector. You have the same discussion everywhere. Switzerland, and that is the problem of the country, is utterly over-regulated. And this over-regulation diminishes the entrepreneurial spirit about which we were talking before.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that because, of course, Switzerland has very high standards for being a light touch government and low taxes and so many other things. But I think that focus on reducing things and creating even more economic and societal freedom is a very positive spirit that Switzerland still pushes forward, and it's great to hear it from you as well. I know crypto isn't something you're terribly focused on, but artificial intelligence is a major topic in your work. Is that something you can tell us a little bit more about your perspective on the theme and how it relates to Swiss SMEs and other things we've talked about?
I have a pretty optimistic outlook about artificial intelligence, despite not knowing what it is. I say it like this because if you start to research anything, you first want to find out, so is there any current definition of artificial intelligence? Because these two words obviously don't say anything at all. What is intelligence and what is artificial? So I started looking around. I had to look around not only in economics, but I even went into psychiatry and philosophy, and in those things. What do you guys tell me? What is artificial intelligence? And then I found out no one really knows it. How do we operationalize it? We look at specific technologies like computer learning, like advanced robotization, like communicating systems, Internet of Things. So if you reduce the big word artificial intelligence to something operational,
Right.
then it's easier to research it. And then, based on that, I conducted a comparative research in Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. I have over 1,200 firms. I asked different questions like, are you investing in artificial intelligence? If you invest in artificial intelligence, do you also expand your workforce? If you invest in artificial intelligence, do you also upscale your workforce and so on? And the interesting thing is, there is no significant difference between large companies and SMEs. They behave more or less all the same. Those investing in artificial intelligence also do expand their staff and do upscale that staff. And I think this is very good news. Now you will say, well, but this is only the 2,200 companies you looked at. I say, yes, but okay, but 1,200 is not that little, not that few. It's an interesting way of dealing with stuff. And if you look back in history, that's what happened too. The moment we introduced machines, we all of a sudden needed more people and better trained people. So this shifting up the economic tissue is something that might happen, or at least in my view, is very likely to happen with artificial intelligence. And
That's
that's good.
that makes a lot of sense to me. Was that what you actually then confirmed in the research? Those 1,200 companies, when they were increasing staff while also implementing the new technologies, was it related, or was it sort of just a correlation or uncorrelated? Pardon me.
It was heavily correlated. What we did is, more specifically, we looked at the numbers. So they had to send in the numbers. So we really looked at documentation, not something that the CEO would say, but because CEOs say stuff all the time. Usually it's not true. So I'm not saying that they are lying. Maybe it's they're lying to themselves. I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking. So we looked at the numbers, and then we tried to make this plausible in 3 to 4 different workshops that we did. And there is a lot of mere correlation going on, but there is also some sort of causation, because enterprises found out, in order to use that stuff, we need people that know how to get value out of that. Because if you just buy a new computer program that makes the Internet of Things work, it is okay. But if you want to, it's okay. It's as a cost-cutting measure. It could even be okay. But if you want to generate value add, if you want to develop something new and sell it to your customers, you need, again, people who know how to operate it, who know how to put it in motion, and who know how to sell it. So that is the causality or strong correlation / causality part that we found out, and was pretty much made plausible in all these workshops we did.
Makes a lot of sense. And I guess then you would also be a big advocate of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and these other technologies being applied in financial services. It's a pretty obvious one where they could be leveraged, right?
Yeah, that is. I myself, well, I don't know if you want anecdotes here. It should be a serious talk, but
No, anecdotes are fine.
um, it's a very simple thing. I'll give you two. The one, even forget the financial place. The Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises itself is an SME. We only have 20 people. And we found out that if we use artificial intelligence for very simple things like translations, it takes a huge burden away from us, and it's make our services better, because as you know, Switzerland, everything should be at least in 2 languages. It is very expensive to translate everything that we produce in German into French and the other way around. But with the artificial intelligence, it's not only that we don't have the same cost block anymore, it's also that we can increase the number of things that we do in both languages, and through that we can increase the pressure part of our work, which is to set our policies in motion. But the other example I wanted to give you,
yeah, please,
relates to the fintech. There is a lot of stuff going on that might help investors invest. And when I say investors, I don't mean those people that went to business school. I mean people that for some reason have money and only and would like to put their money somewhere without an intermediating bank. Or what we have now, the robo advisory, is very good. It's a very good thing. I use robo advisory. I passed all the financials exam I passed through, and I still think that the robo advisory opens my eyes to a lot of things that I've never thought about before. Also, it opens my eyes in ways that are more understandable than the person in the bank telling me, now you have to invest in this fund because of this, this, and this. And I think it is an inclusive technology. Using so-called artificial intelligence in financial relationships, it's an inclusive way of bringing more people into putting their money where there is maybe some yield to be made.
Absolutely. Henrique, I think you're raising incredible points that really tie back to the important role that Swiss culture and politics and business has really had, not only at home, but also abroad over the years. I was wondering, when we look at things today, at least from your perspective in the SME and the academic community, what do you see are the current challenges for Switzerland, and what are the big opportunities when we look into the 21st century in the digital economy?
Let's look at the challenges first. It saddens me to admit that there is a divide. There is a divide, and the divide is increasing between those who see opportunities in technological change and those who do not. We will never have a society where everyone is hurrah about technological change. But I think that Switzerland, in the last couple of years, the group of those that not only are distrustful but actively resist change is becoming larger and larger. And Switzerland, that's still one of the problems. Switzerland is moving in a way that is departing from this freedom-prone culture that we had. Switzerland is becoming more regulated, is becoming more conservative in the bad sense of the word. It's becoming more provincial, and it's becoming more tied up or closed. And this is a serious, very, very serious threat. And if you take this and sum with those that actively resist technology or any change, then it's a big question mark. But there are also positive things. The other half of the population, or let's say a little bit more of the population, it's becoming more and more entrepreneurial. Think about all these platform business models. I mean, politics in Switzerland is trying, they are going out of their way to make platforms less and less attractive, and it's still not working. People are still adopting platforms more and more and more, which means that people are still not dependent of what government and politics say. They are going their own way. And this is good. And that is what makes me happy or confident about our future. As long as we have these people going around and doing whatever they want, we will be fine.
It's great that you touched on the topic of platforms there, and also I think the divide we feel in the world right now. It's unfortunate that people are polarizing and not recognizing our shared issues and opportunities, but I think that's something that you've touched on. It exists even here in Switzerland. It's funny. I wanted to end on the note of something that I have a little bit of a view on. When I came to the Swiss Financial Center, it was shortly after CD-ROMs could be burnt with a lot of data about people and taken across the border. And over the years of talking about fintech, it occurred to me that, much like you're saying, technology can be a threat or it can be an opportunity. And I think the knee-jerk reaction coming from the establishment and some of the culture around financial services was that it wanted to fight the openness of data transfer and resist the need to update its business models. And I still think that that's going on today. So one of the points that I kind of look at is whether or not the traditional strengths that Switzerland relied on, for example, geographic advantages and other things, whether those still apply in a more virtual global world. And I know there are things that are challenging that globalist perspective, and platforms don't do everything in our lives. But as the world does become more global, as businesses become more nomadic, yeah, how does Switzerland fit into that? Does it isolate itself and say we're a great platform for Swiss SMEs? Or, for example, do you see there being opportunities? I know, for example, with ICOs, a lot of international businesses chose Switzerland to be their domicile and their funding platform. That was something that really showed to me the initial opportunity to do something a little bit better thought out and create essentially like a launch platform for Switzerland, or to serve a more global connected type of a role. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how it can play a role in the broader universe beyond just what's going on politically locally?
I'm not sure if I understood that view that you had. You want to position Switzerland, or you think it would be wise to position Switzerland as a global platform for example, technological entrepreneurship, because of the permissionless economic culture we have.
Well, I think to some degree that's already been tested with ICOs and with the crypto valley and things of that nature. You can also look at legal frameworks and patents here. I mean, Switzerland does offer a platform for international businesses, right? I guess that's part one of the question. Is that something you see already in your work with the SME community?
Yes, and by the way, we, the Swiss Federation of Small and Medium Enterprise, we have for a lot of foreign SMEs. What do we mean by a lot? We have a cluster of SMEs that are offspring from international companies that settle down here as SME, or we have really small and medium companies that were formed here by expats or foreigners choosing Switzerland because of its unique legal entrepreneurial framework as the place to launch. I wanted to ask back that to you because for a while it was even the official doctrine of the Swiss Department of Finance to position Switzerland as such a place. I say for a while because in the last couple of years, this position has been considerably weakened, which I deplore. I think that Switzerland really could. Let me put it differently: the idea that you are a neutral country with some privacy laws that are more or less strict, with general economic freedom and especially a symmetry of rights between all the market powers, is something that can be easily transformed into success factor for a more digital, more technological economy. And I really think that we should go around the world and shop for those kinds of companies. We have to make sure that all the other environments like tax and so on also fit with that. And I see a specific homework for politics. That's something that has to be done politically because it's an international approach. So it's an approach by working with, but also against other countries. And this is something that politics has to do. And why the Swiss Ministry of Finance abandoned this approach, that I don't know, but it is sad that they did.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, there's more internal politics sometimes, and there's been a bit of a shift towards more nationalist perspectives in recent times. I think it also just has to do with
that is not my explanation. Sorry, that is true. But in this specific side, I think my hypothesis is the incumbents
Exactly.
Captivated government. Here it was the
Exactly.
lobbying by the incumbents. They didn't want that. They don't want, because any foreigner here would be also a threat. And I'm talking about banks. Banks. I'm talking about banks. And
Yeah.
I'm talking not about the internet banks. I'm talking about the old banks, especially the two big banks in Switzerland, Credit Suisse and UBS.
Yeah.
My hypothesis is they exerted pressure on the government to not do. They exerted pressure on the government onto not positioning Switzerland as a launch pad for international entrepreneurialism in the fintech sector.
I think it would be difficult to prove, but I think if you look at a high level at the incentives and the nature of captive industry regulation, things like that. I mean, this is the center of the global financial system. It's a very friendly distance between Bern and Zurich. And yeah, if you look at just a topic, for example, like open banking, it's obviously very complicated because of the history of banking secrecy and real concerns like there would be around health data or personal data of other kinds. But the incumbents have used their position, their control of access to resources in media for getting out knowledge about what you're up to, and even just funding the startup community, I think, as well. That's been something that's been nascent here in Switzerland because there is that awkward position of incumbents that have things well regulated. And I think it's not necessarily that they don't want to change, it's that they don't know how to change while maintaining their competitive advantages. So there's a delay
Oh
while
no
they
no
try to
no no
figure
no
that
no
out.
no no! I disagree. I don't think they want to change. That's the thing. That's my second hypothesis. They don't want to change. They w- they really don't want to change. There is nothing new. They came up in the last 10 years, but more and more and more regulation. Sorry, but this is something that I am always appalled by. Uh, the idea of the especially two big banks in Switzerland is you regulate the others to death, and then they can take up the market shares left by the others that have been regulated to death. These two, not only, I don't want to demonize them,
No,
but
no.
these two institutes have really the approach in the last 10 years. They didn't come up with anything new. Their only idea is to regulate more, 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 and more. They came up with new regulations, and their captive regulators, the Swiss Financial Market Service, the Swiss Financial Market regulators, likes that because this is on the levels of incentive. It's a win-win situation for everyone. The banks get more regulation and the market share of those that are driven away by regulation, and the regulator gets more power. It's a win-win. It's a bad
Well,
win-win, but it's a win-win.
I'm not an expert on these topics, but I've been a bit of a tourist in Switzerland for 10 years. And I've always been fascinated by the history around Alfred Escher and his ability to help organize all the change that was going on in the pre industrial kind of ferment of Switzerland, politically, economically, industrially, educationally. So many organizations that he helped to bring together to make things work. And it's funny to look at how Credit Suisse is still the second largest bank, and it's actually the fringe around that developed in competition to that major player in the ecosystem that went on to form UBS. And as you say, that's the society we live in now, and those are the regulations that we try to work within, and all the kind of things that we've had to fix from that era, whether it was money laundering issues, all the regulatory burdens that have come onto that are really related to making that a higher barrier to entry for others to get into. So I think there's something you're making a real point about with deregulation and stripping back some of this so that we can really get some change and healthy competition that would create more value. Because I'm a big believer that it's not as scary. I think it's fair to talk about how we might facilitate it in a better way, but I think avoiding the question or blocking the change is really the wrong thing to do.
I would agree with that.
Well, look, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and I don't want to overwhelm our audience. Hani, is there anything you'd like to mention before I let you go and get back to your future work?
Well, I just want to give the message once again. I am pretty optimistic about the future, even if there is a lot of question marks and real problems out there. I am optimistic because as long as there is people willing to do what they want to do, and as long as there are people that don't care about anything else than their own ideas, we will be fine. Remember just one thing: the Wright brothers did not have a pilot license or a university education or money. But they were the first to fly.
It's funny, I think there's something really interesting about how we reflect on ourselves and also connect to others, and it's a balance. And you have to be confident in yourself and also respectful of others. And if you can do those two things really well, I think you're on a good path to figure out how to create value in the world. And I hear a lot of that in what you're saying. So, Professor Henrique Schneider, thank you again for joining us this week. It was a fascinating discussion, and I hope we get a chance in the coming months to catch up again. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Cheers. Have a good weekend.
You too.